So we have this question then that is open about many different SB and then blank roots, but also including just the SB root itself. And I'll explain what I mean by this, because we're today talking about the Sabeans or the Sabeans. We'll see in a second that we actually have a, not a consensus on how we even pronounce this word, actually, in terms of a transliteration. So the word here appears in three different verses. The two first ones are essentially the same formula. Nothing really changes. It repeats the same content. And that's these first two. So we start in Surah 262. Here we see, indeed, and this is according to Sahih International, indeed, those who believed and those who were Jews or Christians or Sabeans before Prophet Muhammad. It's good to have those brackets there. You might get confused. Those among them who believed in Allah and the last day and did righteousness will have their reward with the Lord, and no fear among them concerning them, nor will they grieve. So becomes this very weird ecumenical-ist sort of feeling, like a verse talking about how kind of like basically everyone under the sun is all right, like no worries. All you got to do basically is just sort of believe in God in the last day and do righteousness. That word itself actually means something very different, but that's for another video, because today we're just going to talk about this whole idea of the Sabians. So it's kind of weird that in a book where it, or at least let's say, as an outsider, when you look at Islam, you're like, okay, they're very exclusivistic, right? They're very, okay, there's the land of war, that's where it's not Sharia, and so on and so forth, right? And don't be friends with those who are not, Muslim and all this, right? So it feels like weird for there to be this verse in the Quran where it feels so, everyone's on board, Barack Obama, I don't know, like just like, everyone come, right? So it's kind of strange. What do you think, JC, about these Sabians or Sabaeans?
I think that there is a very good chance that they are there, and that's not what it's meant to say. I mean, with this sentence that we have there, we have the word for Jews is an unusual one, and we are investigating. So hopefully, in the next couple of weeks or so, we will have an actual theory as to why that word is there, and it's possible that it doesn't even mean the Jews. But the main problem is the Christians. It doesn't actually say the Christians; it says the Nasara, and any Muslim will say, yeah, the Nasara are the Christians, except that that is not the term for Christians. And even to this day, people are very confused, and they are trying to figure it out, that they are the Nazarenes, that they are people from Nazareth, and they followed he who was from Nazareth, but they were kind of like a bit of a weird cult. There is another term that is actually pretty much almost agreed on, which is that they are the Notzrim. So we know that this is not talking about Jews, Christians, then Sabeans, and then there is one with the Zoroastrians, the Magians. We know that there is more to that story. And because of this root, we are thinking, okay, is it possible that this is telling a very different story and it's been mistranslated in order to have four different religions? But that's not the case. What if they were talking about different sects of heretical Christians, and these Sabians or Sabians, or however you pronounce it, is actually something else? So this is kind of like what we're exploring today, that this is not as clear cut as in here the Jews are the Jews and the Christians are the Christians. We're not really sure about the Jews, and nobody knows about the Christians or the Nasara. So there is a lot more to this story, and maybe we are getting close to what these people actually believed, and the Sabians are not what we've been told in the standard Islamic narrative.
So, in terms of just thinking right now of two consonantal root, it's what's very curious is the Mandaic, because so the Mandaeans are a group which they still exist today in very small number. They have sort of like a chief authority that's currently, as far as I'm aware, in dispute. So it's almost like having a two popes kind of thing, or more, in fact. We have that in our history. So this Mandaic group, they use the Sade Ba root, the two consonantal root, um, for their main word for who they like for baptism, masbuta, or and so forth. So that is potentially what we're looking at here. It's definitely not from the Gez here, right, and so forth. The Hebrew has the idea of to die or to die stuff. There's traditions in Islam that talk about how people used to die. I mean, not die. People used to baptize people in like slightly yellow dyed water. But again, these are way late traditions. We don't know exactly if that's really speaking on anything necessarily. Um, that said, right, we're looking essentially, if we accept this form, at the Mandaic as being the most likely hit, as being what inspired the intention of the orthography, the original author here. So this is the Mandaean group. You can see more, this is the kind of clothing that they would wear. This is their ritual garb. They actually referred to as Mandaean Sabeans as well. Basically, look, kind of like under the like it's just too obvious, the link. But that said, maybe it's like, oh, everyone kind of acknowledges in a way or another that the Mandaeans are kind of Sabians. Maybe that's just smokes and mirrors again. But the root, all of it lines up for this identification to actually be plausible. So even here, I'm sure it's actually quite small and hard to read, but we see in the Arabic here for al-Sabi'a, right? There's a Hamza there as well, which we should actually not even consider, right? But anyway, so alif, lam, sad, alif, ba. So we have the same form where you have the alif taking the place of the second consonant of the root, potentially, and therefore this identification is even stronger. All right, so then we see here, back to the manuscript here, and also this word again about the usage and how it renders. So the baseline would be to immerse or to baptize. Then we would have the form of masbana, one who is the baptizer, the one who baptizes. And then the sabiya, right, which we can see then is written here. Sade ba is, I don't know what shape that, I don't read Mandaic, but I would assume it would be an H, maybe? I don't know. If it is an H, that would be very interesting because it would resemble the same marbuta shape as the Arabic does. I also want to point out, I just noticed this today when I was looking at these script forms, the Sadeh in the cursive script of the Mandaic looks very, very, very similar to the Sadeh in the cursive Arabic script.
So this one is saying someone calling Muhammad, is this the Sabi? So obviously there is a problem. When you check what Sabi means in the Islamic traditions, they're going to say something different. They're going to actually send you completely and utterly away from the root of baptism, because the same reason why the Quran no longer reads baptism in the cases of John and Jesus. The same is here. But these hadiths, even though they are actually very late, they record people calling Muhammad a Sabi, a Sabian, what, a baptizer. That is actually the root. And as Kash has it right there, highlighted, it is exactly the same root as well. So it looks like at the very beginning of the whole thing, there was this strong influence from people who seem to have the word baptism as a very basic thing and important in their traditions. Otherwise, they wouldn't call someone Sabi. It would be the defining factor of their beliefs. And so far, is pointing quite strongly towards some form of baptism, which is interesting.
Yeah, they replied, yes, the very same person, so come along. This is a story that would probably come from a tradition that is actually talking about Jesus. Why? Well, because Jesus was a baptizer. He was going around baptizing people, so they would have referred to him as a Sabi, for example. And also this image of like, yes, the very same person, so come along. You know, you have this dynamic as well in the early times when, you know, Christ comes into contact with the apostles, right? This sort of buzzing. And yeah, so I would put forward that this memory that we have here, right? It doesn't say even Muhammad, even though Muhammad would also refer to Jesus, but it uses Rasulallah. So you can see kind of this spirit of Abd al-Malik as well, where this focus on Rasulallah theology is also playing a role here. Probably it's all over the hadith, obviously, and the modern Islamic reading is simply to read it as, oh yeah, it's a title, I guess, for Muhammad because he was a messenger for Allah, just like the 200-some thousand other prophets before him, I suppose. But the thing is that the term Rasulallah is actually the term Malak Yahweh. And this Malak Yahweh term isn't just anyone. It isn't just any angel or whatever. It is specifically the angel of the Lord, Malak Yahweh, right? So this is identifying someone who is divine, and he's called It seems like a Baptist or baptizer or something like this.
So just to put this thing again in a almost timeline order. So we already discussed on the channel the problems with the name Muhammad or Mahmad, and anyone who is familiar with the works of J. Smith will be very familiar with that argument. So we've discussed that one as well on the channel. So if you haven't watched that, make sure that you do. We go through the 4 verses where Mahmad appears and how they are mistranslated and all of that. So we have Mahmad, who was originally in the Quran because it was about Jesus. It was just another title for Jesus. So, okay, we have that. Then we look at the Quran and we find next to John and next to Jesus this word Sabi, which seems to be baptism. And when we think about the fact that we never call John John, we call him always John the Baptizer. If there is a place in the Quran where that word is hidden, is next to him. And lo and behold, there we have it. It happens to be that very exact root. And in Surah 19, it just fits. And then when we look at the hadiths, they're talking about Mahmad. They still have this memory of who the original character was. And the original character in their traditions, when everything began, was Jesus. Then, of course, they added a lot of different mythology, and probably they added stories of other people, such as Umar, Ali, Marwan I, Abdul Malik, and all of those people. So they obviously create a lot. But still, through the hadiths, they have this one here calling the messenger of Allah Sabi. Now, that would not make any sense if we are thinking about it from the standard Islamic narrative point of view. But if we see what they have been doing with the Quran and how they have actually hidden this word in plain sight next to John, next to Jesus, when we look at this hadith, we start to understand, okay, Muhammad is Jesus, therefore here, someone addressing the messenger of God as Sabi, that would have to be, well, it could potentially be John, but based on all of the hadiths, is probably the memories that they had about Jesus, people actually addressing him. So we see how those stories that they knew about Jesus, they actually become part of the Muhammad mythos. And when we just dig a little bit, we see how it doesn't make sense with the interpretation that we now have and the understanding of the Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative. But when we take those words and we put them together with Jesus, they actually make sense. And we can start to unpick how the traditions were actually built and what sort of memories people who were writing these traditions actually remembered. They had these traditions from some place. Some of them that would have been the warlords, but some of these traditions they came directly from the source, which was Jesus. Hence why as well, Muslims to this day believe that Jesus comes back on the day of judgment. They then changed that and said, no, it's Muhammad who returns. They were stuck with Jesus because that had been there for a really long time.